All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Exemption Committee meeting of the Environmental Advisory Council. It's 12:01. Call the meeting to order. Let's go around the call and introduce ourselves. My name is Michelle Lefebvre. I'm the Exemption Committee Chair. Onauna.
Hi, Onauna Thone, Exemption Committee member.
Tom.
Tom Eisen, staff here with Environmental Review Program.
Jessica. Jessica, if you can hear us, if you could unmute and introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I was just, I guess, attending public meetings just for fun.
Great. Welcome.
Excellent.
Sherry.
Aloha, I'm Shuri. I'm from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and our draft exemption list update is being reviewed today, or discussed, like reviewed and discussed further today.
Thank you, Shuri. And Jiping, if I pronounced that right?
Yes, I'm Japin Faust, staff of SFA. I joined the meeting just to see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so on our agenda today, we have two lists to discuss, Department of Hawaiian Homelands list and the State of Hawaii School Facilities Authority. We'll start with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands list. Shuri, I sent you a list of comments that we had discussed. I expect it'll take us some time to get through that list. So Jiping, just be aware it may be sometime, maybe closer to 12:40, 12:45 that we switch from DHHL to SFA, but welcome to stay on if you like.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Cherie, for the list. We appreciate you submitting that and the time it took the effort to put into the list. I know that it's an update from the April 4th, 2021 list. Yeah, overall, I thought, there were a lot of additions, sometimes in some cases, putting additional restrictions, on the agency. So a lot of our questions were about that and just kind of wanting to understand a little bit more, and in some cases why and maybe it's just a decision-making tool, to have it, in writing. Certainly there's nothing wrong with having those restrictions there, but we noticed, because you provided the red line version in a lot of those cases where it got smaller. So yeah, maybe we just start with the list I sent you, and we can sort of march through.
Okay, that sounds good. And then just to let you know, so I'm the water program specialist at DHHL, and I'm still learning to be well versed in 343.
Okay, great.
I saw that you also submitted like general overview questions. Did you want me to answer those before we get started?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just the general comments.
So throughout the year of 2023, there's been a lot of internal collaboration and discussion with members from each division within DHHL. And therefore, like, a lot of different individuals have assisted with input on this update, and more specified questions may need to be relayed to the appropriate division in order to bring a more thorough response to the committee. So I will be acting as the liaison today and do my best to provide succinct answers to the comments that you have for us. And if I am unable to provide a suitable answer, I will take back any questions to other DHHL staff and bring that information back to the committee, either at a future meeting or via email, whichever is preferred. And this revised list was also created by incorporating activities from other approved state agency exemption lists. We are very amenable to your feedback and suggested changes. But one of the main purposes for updating this list is to streamline and simplify the process that existing DHHL homestead lessees need to go through to make improvements to their individual homestead lot, due to DHHL lands being considered state lands, and state lands being one of the triggers of HRS 343. There are additional loops that our lessees have had to jump through to make simple routine improvements to their homestead lot, whereas similar activities conducted by a private homeowner to maintain their property would not have had the state lands trigger under HRS 343. So DHHL is really truly seeking to provide parity between our homestead lessees and private homeowners, as for all intents and purposes. DHHL views individual homestead lots as the private possession of our lessees to be used for their individual betterment. And a lot of the detail we've included in this draft exemption list may not be needed if the ERP and this committee also view DHHL lands that are under 99-year homestead lease to individual Native Hawaiians similar to that of private homeowners rather than state lands used for public purposes. And then additionally, we have increased the level of specificity to create future safeguards for environmental management and to prevent misinterpretation of activities. Having a higher degree of specificity, we hope, will lower the level of discretion that staff needs to have and provide clearer guidance to staff when making an exemption determination. And then I've collected responses to the best of my knowledge for the question and comments you proposed, but that was my
No, that
general
totally
overview.
totally makes sense, and it's definitely something we had talked about internally, that maybe this is just really good, very detailed guidance. Again, just like you said in your comments, like not needed in terms of 343, not needed to be that specific. But if it's a helpful, like you're saying, to the lessees and to safeguard, like you said, future process, then that definitely answers a lot, I think, of why that level of detail is there. We're often thinking about, not hamstringing, agencies, not tying, folks to be, that specific when they don't need to be, just so there's more flexibility. But we definitely understand what you're saying, and thank you for explaining it. Good. All right. Well, just the general formatting, page numbers would just be an easy addition, I think, just as a reference to it. Yeah, I think the other general comments we just covered basically. Onauna, did you have any other thoughts on the sort of the specificity comments or the administrative action comments given what Cherie just explained?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that explanation. As Michelle said, I mean, we do like to have the agencies, we want them to have some flexibility, because you can't quite literally list every scenario in these lists. It would be so bulky, but we do understand from your perspective in terms of making sure, the beneficiaries themselves know what actions are exempt, and even for internal training of agency staff, right? Because there is turnover and whatnot. And so for you folks, when you get a request that comes in, right, you'll need to be able to respond to the beneficiaries about whether or not they can do X, Y, and Z through an exemption or not. So, and Michelle, I was looking for your email. I don't know if I was on your email to DHHL in terms of which comments you already provided to them. So did we get a written response back on the comments so far? Because I think we made it almost through the whole DHHL list. We actually had a couple more pages. A lot of our comments, and again, Michelle, I'm not too sure what you sent at this point, and it may just have gotten lost in my inbox. So that may be on me.
I just forwarded it to you again,
Okay,
to your
great.
email, just so you have it. It's also in the notes. It just spanned 2 meetings, and it's probably just easier to reference the email I just forwarded you.
Okay, I don't think it came in just yet, so I'll keep
Okay.
an eye. There, yes. Okay. Yeah. So some of our comments, okay. Thank you, Michelle. These are really, really good notes. Okay. And then we haven't gotten written responses yet or an updated list based on these comments.
I just sent it to Cherie and just said, here are our thoughts, and please join the meeting to
okay. Got it. Yeah.
Would you
so
prefer that though?
to go through I mean, we can go through the specific ones if that's helpful to you. I think a lot of our comments were primarily whether or not things are categorized correctly as part one versus part two. So in terms of the part one, right? I mean, those are things that are exempt. They're really intended to be more administrative in nature and maybe not so much in terms of like uses that would impact the environment, right? So anything where when you folks are going through this list, if you even have a question about whether it's part one or part two, that kind of more so leans to it being a part two exemption. And the part two stuff is what we consider, right? You have to once a month, the agencies under the new rules are supposed to make a list of all the exemptions that they did the prior month and then send it to ERP for publication, right? So it's just a simple list. It's not the whole exemption determination, which you folks can keep internally, but it's just kind of a, hey, these were the types of exemptions that we did. So a lot of our comments are more so focused on more so just recategorizing, I think, what we think is more appropriate maybe under a part two. And we can go through a couple of those. And then I know we did have just, some questions. I mean, there were a couple of exemptions where we thought maybe they were redundant in more than one category. Excuse me. In more than one category, so we can kind of take out some of those redundancies. And then I think the last one we actually did have a question on.
The biggest one was the
Oh, wait, we did.
the type part one, type 7 was probably our biggest one, but we can go through, I think, in order.
Okay, yeah.
and get-
Those are kind of just the general comments, and
Yeah.
Michelle, if you want to lead through the list, so.
Yeah, sure. That sounds good. So I think the first one, the part one, type 1, the numbering after 10, that just seemed to have been just a hiccup in the formatting. So it goes 10 and then it starts at 1 again. So if you could just have it be sequential. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
fixed it. Thank you.
The next one, part 1, type 1, the second number 10, right, which should be 20. So this was the use of lands and waters by those exercising traditional and customary practices. I think our comment here was, I think we just were looking for some clarification if this included collecting or gathering. We were just in the category, I think, the type of operations, repairs, or maintenance. That was the type of exemption we were in, and we were just wondering how this sort of fell within operation.
And even in that, I mean, that I guess for me personally, I don't consider or think of the exercise of traditional customary practices to necessarily trigger 343. So I think I wanted to kind of understand your folks thinking more so on why it was added to the list in the first place as needing an exemption.
I did see it on DLNR's exemption list and they kind of placed it here. So I think I wasn't too sure if that was something we should also include as a safeguard to make sure that our beneficiaries knew it is okay for them to do.
Okay.
And due to the specific nature of DHHL's beneficiaries being of Native Hawaiian descent, it felt necessary to have a written rule further verifying that these actions be exemptable, should they be minor. And typically, collecting and gathering is a part of that typical traditional and customary practice. Potentially like restoration of fish ponds or lo'i might also be incorporated into traditional and customary practices. And then our NAHASTA specialist noted to me that the exemption here does not negate the need for compliance with 6E.
Okay. Yeah, in that context of, like restoration of lo'i or fish ponds, I can see where maybe that fits into operations and maintenance. I guess I was thinking more on like an individual level in terms of just like, gathering or whatnot, which seemed a little odd to me. Yeah.
Because then we thought if it was just gathering or collecting, then maybe, you know, under type 4, you know, where it's under minor alterations and conditions in land, water or vegetation, you know, maybe that would be a more natural fit than operations. But yeah, it's not necessary to move it, just I guess something to consider.
Right.
And potentially adding maybe a parenthetical there, not limited to, you know, restoration of,
Yeah. For example.
but
right.
for example, fish ponds, that might help lessees understand what this applies to. If we have the question, maybe they would also.
Mhm.
But understood that it came from the DLNR list. And sometimes this happens where it's, you know, goes through on one list and then we sort of think more about it when we see it again. So appreciate that there was a history to it, but
Mhm.
yeah. Okay, the next one was part 1, type 1, number 16. Would have been 26, the last one of the type 1. This was projects completed with NEPA review that support a finding of exempt activities and categorically excluded, which substantiate a categorization of de minimis activities. So there, I think we were just, you know, I had some questions about, you know, tiering to NEPA and tiering to categories, you know, of exemption types under, and specifically HUD exemption types for NEPA. What did your folks have to say about our question there?
In conversation with the group, we added this because it seems unnecessary to do 343 for these specific activities, which would basically be a checkbox compared to the level of evaluation required to complete the evaluation for these levels of NEPA projects. And additionally, we included it because of a separate exemption regarding rehab / demo new constructions that could not be utilized for homes with hazards, for example, ODB, ACM. So this is to act as a capture for those, as hazard assessment and abatement is required of 58.34 and 58.35. I was wondering if this is another area with too much detail and if the committee would recommend removing this and that of other related exemptions.
Well, I think if there's, you know, now that you've gone into the specific concerns, if it's better just to highlight what the, you know, those specific instances, you know, related to, you know, to hazards under, you know, under a different category. But I think this would require a lessee to go look up, you know, what the exempted categories are under, you know, 5834 and 5835. So that's creating work maybe and sending someone somewhere else, you know. So I think that would fit under, you know, other exemption types. So I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with maybe just explaining like, okay, hazard abatement, right, in certain circumstances. I mean, and if these are really tailored to, you know, homestead single family, for like individual single family homes, maybe even having that explanation up front. Because, you know, I could imagine, okay, if you're doing, you know, asbestos remediation in your individual single family home, that's one thing. But if DHHL has other commercial properties, right, or they're doing it for a whole subdivision, that might be something that maybe doesn't belong under an exemption, right, depending on scale. So that's where I think a lot of our questions are coming from, not having reviewed this without having the knowledge that you folks were looking at, really trying to make sure that the individual homeowners can handle, you know, their property as any private owner would. So yeah, I don't know about just deleting it, but yeah, I think having a better explanation about you know, hazard abatement, blah, 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 for, you know, individual single family residences done by the homeowner, right? And these things are being contracted by the homeowner too, right? I mean, it's not DHHL paying for these types of activities that are being done on the individual parcels. Is that a correct understanding?
I believe so. That's how it was explained to me in our conversation.
I think just, yeah, not necessarily deleting it, but expanding on it. And you know, if it's for the lessee, then I guess revising the language so it's clear that it's for an individual homeowner. If it's for a program level or for a larger structure, then you know, clarifying
Mhm.
what it applies to. Okay. For the part one, type two, I think we've discussed that already, which was the rationale for adding size limits. We understand that now. The next one was part one, type two, 1E. And that was the installation of systems and whether this should be considered under a part two rather than a part one.
Yeah, so again, I guess if this is, if you're doing a solar hot water for just like one home, I think that's fine. That makes sense as a part one. But again, I think a lot of our comments were really, you know, again, if DHHL was developing the whole subdivision, right? So if you're going to do 250 houses and you're talking about, you know, lighting for a whole subdivision, that would have a different impact versus an individual home. So yeah, I mean, I think if you guys like for example, if you're going to leave this one here, maybe it has, you know, a caveat that these are on, you know, individual homeowner basis versus full DHHL projects. And I say that and I cringe a little when I say it because now this almost makes your list longer if you're separating out, you know, big DHHL projects versus folks on the individual level. But I think you understand where we're coming from in terms of the scale, right? So I don't know, Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sorry, took a while to unmute. I get the conundrum. Scale makes a big difference on some level. Somewhere on that sliding scale, the scale matters. At another level, like if it's a deal when it's big, when does it not become a deal? To say that at the homeowner side, it can just proceed without the review. But I certainly understand that the need for parity with typical homeowners on land, and they would never be required to do something like a EA for a solar system. So why should that happen?
Right.
So, but again, just more explanation, I think is good. Like you say, clarification of how at some far end of that low end of the scale, it's appropriate that it's part one. If it's really even, well, I guess, and then just to finish that thought, at the other end, it's a bigger deal. And so it should get more review. But I guess in my mind, this whole question of, and it's more of a legal interpretation, and maybe there have been some that I'm not aware of, that if these are either are state lands, do trigger 343 or don't trigger 343. If that could be made clear, more clear, rather than having to do these interpretations on an individual project basis, I think that would clarify the bigger picture. And that may be taking it to a different level, getting deputy attorney generals involved and opening up maybe a real big can of worms. But if it somehow could be clarified that at the individual level, they are to be treated as kind of non-state lands, that would remove this burden that we're kind of struggling over where to have that scale fit.
Yeah, and actually, as you say that, Tom, thank you for that because that triggered in my mind, right? So, I mean, the individual homeowners, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, we'd have to consider them applicants. Like these are applicant actions, not agency actions. And so they're not even in 343 for all of this stuff unless they had a discretionary approval, right? So, I mean, if they're going to put solar on their property, no discretion, they don't have a discretionary approval. They're not even in 343. So there's nothing to exempt. right? I mean, if they're going to put a hot water heater in, you don't have a discretionary, same, right? I mean, in a normal home, as far as I know, I'm assuming no discretionary approval, right? So, so maybe that actually simplifies this further, right? Because I mean, yeah, we can't think of the individual homeowners as agencies because it's not just the trigger of use of state land, right? I mean, if for an applicant action, you need that discretionary approval. So maybe we're thinking too hard on this at the end of the day when it comes to homeowners, and these exemptions really should be primarily for, you know, Sharif, for when DHHL is doing the work versus the homeowner.
But to the extent that DHHL has drafted this list with the homeowner in mind,
And maybe
Um,
it gets adjusted for, yeah, I mean, the individual homeowner act, I think it's instructive for certain individual homeowner actions to the extent they need a discretionary approval, right? So, for example, if you do have something in the conservation district, if you need a conservation district use permit or like a special management area permit, we consider those, you know, discretionary approvals, then, you know, this list would apply. But on just like a normal, yeah, changing the lighting in your home, even hazard abatement in an individual home, if there's no discretionary approval, I mean, the applicant, so the homeowner in this situation wouldn't even be in 343. So you really don't even have an action to exempt in that case, right? Because it's not the state doing the work, even though it is on state land.
What if they're attempting to utilize like NAHASTA and HUD funds? Like, would that then cause
you're
them to have
attempting to
go
use,
through
sorry, which funds?
NAHASTA or fund or HUD?
Okay. Do you need, yeah, I guess, I mean, gosh, that's just a funding. Is that considered a discretionary approval? And sorry, I don't actually personally have a lot of experience with HUD funding, so that's why I'm asking that question, right?
Well, would that be considered state or county funds?
I mean, that's federal, right? HUD is federal.
Right, so it may not hit the trigger, but if there's some decision by DHHL to allow this application to proceed, then maybe that is getting to be a discretionary approval. I just don't know at all about the processes, but I think it's a good point you raised about, you know, there is this double screen to get into the funhouse of 343 for private applicants, both the trigger and a discretionary consent. And so introducing that logic or concept into the clarification for this, I think may be helpful to try to make it more obvious when a private homeowner does not have to go through any of this.
How do you folks decide if somebody gets HUD funding? Is it just a checklist? They meet these criteria, and so long as they meet X, Y, and Z, they get the funding? Or is it purely, you know, goes to, I don't know who makes the decision. Is it the director, or is it the commission that says, okay, yeah, this homeowner can have this funding?
It's a very great question. I many months ago got the quick explanation of that, so it might not be the best explanation. But I do know that, say a lessee needs to redo their roof, like part of it caved in. I think they call someone here, basically say, hey, we need to do rehab for our house because of this. We grab their information and we check to see if we conduct a preliminary environmental evaluation, just like a quick run, like, are they in a flood hazard area? Are they in a SMA, etc.? What is the age of the house? And then we will also do I guess it's called like a financial sort of background check to see if they meet the criteria to gain access to NAHASDA and HUD funds. I'm not too sure of the process after that. I am the one who does a few of the preliminary environmental evaluations, so I know that component. But I can get back to you if.
Yeah, sure. Well, more so for you guys, right? I mean, so in terms of like what we think discretionary approvals, right? It's if the agency has any discretion, like typically when you look in statute or rules, it says the agency may approve or deny certain requests, right? Whereas ministerial, I mean, we think of more just a checklist, like so long as you submit this form and you give us this information, then your request is granted, kind of a thing. And so when we're talking about discretionary approvals being required in the concept of 343, that's what we're talking about, right? So for DHHL as a state agency, anything you do, you're in 343 because it's use of state or county lands or state or county funds, period, right, as the agency. But for the applicant, which I think we could comfortably consider individual homeowners here, in the case that you folks are trying to solve for, they would not only need that use of state lands, the trigger, but they also need the discretionary approval. So if there isn't a discretionary approval, right? For example, if the HUD application is you just put an application in, as long as you give us your information and you meet the financial requirements, you get it. I mean, I think most folks would consider that ministerial, right? And so probably say, and you have to, DHHL should consult with its own AGs on that interpretation, right? Because I personally don't know enough about the process to give that opinion, but using it as an example, if it was that simple, to me, that sounds ministerial. So the applicant in that case wouldn't be in 343 in any event, and there's nothing to exempt, right? Yeah. So yeah, I guess as we're going through this, I think for a lot of these things that you folks have on your list, I almost kind of, I see what the problem you folks were trying to solve, but maybe it's more of like an overall statement on the front of the document about, basically absent a discretionary approval, homeowners doing stuff on their property as, aren't in 343, right? I'll further caveat that by, I don't know if there's a want from the agency to monitor what's going on these properties, right? So giving folks just kind of free reign could be dangerous in a sense, right? Where, if they have to come to you folks for some kind of notification or whatnot, and I'm not sure what's in the leases themselves, that you can kind of keep track of the work they're doing, rather than say, okay, yeah, you're not here. You're not in 343 and you don't need to do any kind of an exemption. That could be potentially dangerous, right? As well. So that it might just involve a different process on DHHL side in terms of saying, hey, if you're doing any work on your home, you got to let us know, right? And in certain cases, maybe you do require them to do some kind of an assessment.
In the instance where an individual homeowner is the applicant, as an applicant is doing something to the home that does, let's say it's in a conservation district and triggers 343, that's still an applicant action, right? If it's a homeowner doing it, it's an applicant action and not not an agency action. It's not DHHL submitting that.
Yeah, because it'd be the homeowner who's applying, right? I mean, the homeowners own the home, DHHL just owns the land. Right. So yeah, I would say that would be an applicant, because DHHL is not putting in these applications on behalf of the homeowners.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At least that's my understanding. And if I'm wrong, Sheree, just let me know. Yeah.
Don't believe you're wrong, but I'm also not incredibly versed in this specific area.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you for that, by the way. I will bring that back to the group and discuss that with them.
Yeah, that might be a way to, I think, simplify your list. And because really, again, we're looking at for your actions, these are things that the agency does. I wouldn't see a problem with DHHL internally making something that's akin to an exemption list, or just a list of things like normal actions lessees take on their properties, right? And kind of have that separated out for you folks instructively to say, these are the types of things that, we'd exempt for the individual homeowner, and keep that stuff separate from the activities that DHHL itself is doing. right? Because I actually think that would probably simplify the list significantly for you folks instead of mixing and matching things DHHL does with things the beneficiaries are doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And so we have spent a lot of time reviewing your list, and I'd hate to say maybe, I don't know if you guys want to take that attempt to kind of separate out just the homeowner stuff versus the stuff DHHL does. But that might be something to take back to the group who's working on this, just so that I think it would make sense for you folks just in the long run.
And because the list bounces between, you know, highway improvements and then individual, you know, it does bounce between what you would do it on an individual home property versus what DHHL is doing. I think, you know, maybe it could be by splitting it out more useful, you know, to the lessee, and then the exemption list being useful, more useful to the agency that way. But maybe we should, I mean, many of these fall in that, I think, category. But, you know, maybe we should carve out some time to talk about the Part 1 Type 7 exemption, just because it's a whole other kind of conversation.
Sure.
Was it Type 7? Oh,
Okay.
Oh,
was it Type?
zoning variance?
Yeah, the zoning variance.
Oh, sorry, Type 10. Type 10, my apologies. New construction of exemption Part 1 Type 10.
Here we go. Yeah, okay. This one.
Yeah. Oh, no, do you want to lead this discussion? I feel like you.
Yeah, so the reason we are asking about this one is because it looks like you folks kind of tried to mirror what we have in our exemption now, the new affordable housing exemption. But it's specific to just, you know, new construction of DHHL homestead development, period. So in terms of how we've been talking about this, is this exemption meant to apply to, I guess DHHL developing, again, for the example, a whole subdivision, versus, you know, a homesteader gets their piece of parcel and they build their home? Because I'm familiar with, like, out in Kapolei, right? I think DHHL, I don't know if you did it through a development partner, but the homestead is given to the beneficiaries, like house complete, everything done, right? Like, I don't know if they're the ones that, I think they finance it, of course, but they're not the ones engaging the contractors, right? Because it's like a very cohesive subdivision, I think. That's my understanding. Versus I'm sure there are other homestead arrangements where you just give the folks the bare land and they go from there. So first question, what is exemption type 10, I guess, aimed at?
I know when we held internal conversations around type 10, there was a lot of back and forth on it, and some people were asking if we could change it so that it could actually, what's it called, like, apply to us, because I guess the way that it's written currently, it can't actually apply to many of DHHL's projects. When I brought this question back to our group, the question you guys posed to discuss, instead of generating answers, it ended up generating questions on our side about it, which may or may not be helpful. So some people were wondering if, in your response to this, you said type 10 in the rules applies to affordable housing, but as written, this exemption would apply to all DHHL homestead development. This may not be something that can be exempted in a list, but may require a legislative exemption. So one question someone asked was if the committee is then saying that DHHL cannot pursue type 10 exemptions, but other agencies can. And then do other agencies also need legislative exemptions to exercise this, or is it handled a bit differently?
Yeah, well, the housing exemption itself and that affordable housing exemption, I mean, we went back and forth for a really long time to tease that one out, and it was specifically meant for affordable housing rather than housing developments generally, right? Over the last, I want to say 2 to 3, at least legislative sessions, there have been bills proposed to exempt housing development, period, whether it's affordable or not, on urban lands, even on ag lands. So it is somewhat controversial, at least, be just exempting housing, period. And so I guess that's where we were getting at. I mean, we're not saying that you can't do it, right? It's just it wasn't one of the original categories that was in there. And the category that we currently do have is specifically for affordable housing. I mean, I think, yeah, that it makes sense for DHHL to have an exemption, right? I mean, the goal is to get people homesteaded as quickly as possible, get homes developed for Hawaiian. So I support that generally. I'm not clear. We'd have to have our AGs look into it on whether or not that is an exemption that we could just throw into a list, right? For sure, if that's in there, I would think that would not be a Part 1 exemption. It would definitely be a Part 2 exemption. Because if you guys are going to go do, 200, 400, 500 homes, right? That's a large subdivision. So presumably there's going to be some kind of environmental look at that and whatnot. But to the extent, and again, we haven't, as an exemption committee, and we haven't had our AG look at it, whether or not you can do it. This might be something that I think your folks' AGs might want to look into as well. Can you just add like a whole new category for housing generally? And would it be appropriate on an exemption list? Part of our question of, that we had back to you folks, because we weren't sure if that was appropriate here, was whether or not there's been an attempt by DHHL to just get an exemption in 343 through the legislature. Because if it's in statute, you're good, Yeah, rather than just putting in a brand new category in an exemption list. And again, I'm not sure that we could say yes, you can, or that you can at this point, but my gut kind of leans more to no, because it's supposed to be consistent with these types of activities, right? Yeah.
And I might add, just as guidance for what these agency exemption lists are, the rules have more legal status, or they have a legality to them. And if the rule talks about how it has to meet county zoning, I don't know how a list could just like wipe that out. Even if that might be wanted, that's where the legislation may be the right place for this fix to supersede what the rules state. But given that the rules do have these provisions that it has to be consistent with county zoning, which unfortunately provides this very difficult situation. I don't think the way around that is through the guidance that an exemption list has.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for DHHL, again, I mean, very worthy mission. I would hope folks would support a legislative exemption altogether for DHHL housing. But I kind of think that's probably the more appropriate way to do. And I just don't know. Have you folks tried? I don't recall seeing one, at least in the last couple of years, not that I've looked at every single bill. But I feel like this is one that would definitely get some publicity. I mean, have you folks tried seeking that?
I don't believe so. I know people were also a little uncertain about the definition of affordable housing, because as of recent years, it's been interpreted like incredibly differently.
Yeah. It's based on county definitions, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole thing, AMI, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, for you folks, I'm not saying that DHHL housing has to be in that affordable category, right? But I think I actually think an exemption for DHL would just be a wholly separate exemption, right? I mean, it is kind of its own category for good reason, right? There's a good legislative history for that. So I think, yeah, part of the issue here is, one, we're not sure that we can kind of allow the change to the rule in this fashion, but you folks are attempting to kind of squeeze your exemption in under one that was really aimed and vetted through public process for affordable housing, right? So that's why we made the comment about, hey, I mean, good idea, but maybe this is something that goes straight into statute that would be strongest for you folks rather than being on the exemption list.
Thank you. I will talk to the group about this.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, happy to talk up, again, we're happy to get on calls if needed to discuss. I mean, yeah, we're just curious about the process that was, you folks were going through in terms of that. And again, yeah, I mean, ask if they've tried that. I think that would be a good approach to do a legislative exemption.
And if you want to respond, by email to keep the conversation going, we can do that, or we can set up a smaller call to have an individual conversation about it, if that helps, Sheree.
Thank you. Yes, that'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got 13 minutes left, and I did want to spend some time talking about School Facilities Authority. We're right on schedule, so what I expected. So I think, Sheree, you've got questions you need to ask and conversations you need to have, and then just reach back out to me and CC Tom, and yeah, we'll figure out the next step forward based on what your folks want to do. But yeah, we're here to help, and yeah, happy to discuss further.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheree. Yeah, so I guess just take it back to them, see if they want to kind of pull out the homeowner stuff separate to simplify, and then on that, yeah, exemption 10. I'd be interested to understand more about whether folks are interested in going for a legislative exemption, and if not, I guess we can talk from there.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming.
Nice meeting you.
Same here. Okay, so next on the agenda was the School Facilities Authority. Hunana, did you have a chance to look through that list a bit?
No, apologies, I did not, just because I thought we were going to go through this one.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, I noted just a couple of small typographical errors. The first one, type 1, part 1, H, just sometimes there's a period, sometimes there's not a period after these. It's Manini, little thing, but I think just so it looks consistent throughout, either add the periods or delete them. I did look through and compared the list to the one reviewed by the exemption committee when Ron was head back in January 2023, and did confirm that all the changes that Ron requested were made. So that included the type 1, number 2J, the exterior lighting was a specific request by Ron. I anticipate we'll probably have to discuss this further next week, but type 2, number 7, the changes to exclude seawalls that Ron requested or that the council or the committee requested were made.
Let me take a look.
Ping, since we have you on the call, did you want to add anything about the process the SFA used to develop the revised list?
I don't have anything to add, or thank you very much. I'm new to this assignment, so I got major work done by my previous coworker. So I'm trying best to address all the comments that must be addressed to finish the list. So thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the list is almost almost identical, just those changes that you made based on the comments from last time. So yes, thank you very much for doing that. I did see that they reorganized it slightly, just to break out, separate the part one from the part two. Last time it was it went by type, and then it was part one, part two, and then the second type, part one, part two, and the list has been sort of split into the part ones and the part twos, which I think
That makes sense. Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay, so no, other than the changes we requested from last time, no major changes.
No, yes, the activity will be the same. Mainly is the capital improvement project, and will work for DOE. So, DOE is a lot of activity we are going to consider. So, we may not do it, but because it's on the DOE's campus, so all the classrooms, maintenance, so we may encounter in the future. But our project mainly is capital improvement project.
Okay. So, for part two, I see you like going back to this affordable housing construction. You guys added that in, but I mean, does DOE develop any affordable housing?
I had that
At
comment
this
from
point, yeah, at this point, we don't have anything yet. It's building for teacher housing.
Okay.
Probably will not be in the Waikiki area. We're still looking for the land, state land. It's still in the planning stage. We want to including that activity for the exemption for future construction activity.
Right. Okay.
I mean,
Understood.
9 and 10 under part 10 are identical from the rules.
Right.
I mean, I just question whether they were needed at all.
Sure.
But
yeah, that's always our question in terms of, when we're looking at the list is understanding, because exemptions are going to differ between agencies, right? Depending on the type of work that you're doing. So, yeah, that's the reason I asked. I was like, whether or not, you guys are doing affordable housing. And I feel like there are some initiatives to look at doing just affordable housing on state land generally, and maybe it would be DOE land. So if that's the case, then, this makes sense. And I guess even in the context of potential teacher.
But is it needed if it's word for word the type 10 exemption in the rules? I mean, it's not. I guess you put it in the part two, so you're acknowledging that as an agency you see it as a part two.
Yeah, I'm okay with them leaving it. I mean, these are the agency's lists, right? And so if it's an effort just to make sure everything is kind of what's in the rules is, checked and also in here, that's okay. I just, again, always ask the question. Part of it is my own education and understanding what are the different kinds of projects that agencies are doing. And once we understand, we can kind of give better comments, right? So, yeah, I think those are okay. So, Michelle, I mean, yeah, it's because we've already seen this list before and they've made the changes that we made. Although I don't see it on the agenda, so I don't know if we can do it this time. Typically, we take action to recommend publication, right? For the 15-day comment period.
Sorry, I just wanted to bring one thing up under the type 7, the zoning variances. I did notice one. I think it was an addition from the last time. It's the number 3 under type 7, infrastructure and utilities.
Okay.
Seem like we're under the category of zoning variances. So are these zoning variances for infrastructures and utilities, or? And I realize you may have not have drafted this, but you have to speak to it now, but I noticed under type 7 last time that was a slight change.
Okay, I'll check it. It's a type 7 and number 3. Okay.
Yeah. So
Um,
part 2 actions.
part 2.
type-
Okay. It's zoning. Zoning.
Zoning. There's a number 3 said
Zoning
infrastructure.
very said, okay, except, okay. I will check is the activity we're doing within that zoning for the infrastructure is also support for the housing. So the developer has to clarify the zoning is okay to use for develop the teacher housing, because the infrastructure, all the utilities, all are for the housing, for maybe build a new school, and new school will be school using zoning, and the housing will be residential zoning for teacher can live there.
Okay.
That would be have some zoning variance clarified change.
So like the way number 1 and number 2 are written, it says zoning variances for buildings and structures, zoning variances for site improvements, maybe just adding the word zoning variance for infrastructure.
Okay, yes, that makes sense.
If that's the intention, then maybe just that revision would help clarify.
Yeah, because
Yes,
I think type 3, part 2, type 3, number 5 would cover the construction and location of single new small facilities, right?
Okay, part 2, type 5.
No, part 2, type 3.
Part 2, type 3. Okay.
Yeah, because I right, Michelle. So one is type
Yeah,
7.
sorry, I didn't catch that. Yeah, so I think it's just a matter of adding those words into number 3 and number 4.
Okay.
I find part 2, type 3, all okay.
Yeah, the number 5. No changes
Number
needed. I
5.
was just commenting that I think the actual development of the infrastructure is covered. You guys have it listed under type 3, right? Number 5 versus.
Oh yes, okay. Essential infrastructure and public utility services.
Yeah. Service extensions. Yeah, it's service structures. I'm just okay. And so these are also limited in size. Yeah, so I think Michelle, like I was saying, I was like, I typically we'd make the recommendation. I think next step is to council to publish for 15 days, although I don't see that action item on the agenda, so I'm not 100% sure if we can make that recommendation right now. And if not, I think we could certainly add it to the May meeting. So shipping the next step, right, is I don't know that you can make that little change that we discussed for type number 7. The next step would be that we make a recommendation to the council to publish the list for a 15-day comment period. So it gets published in the environmental notice. And any comments that the public has during that time, you folks, would make adjustments to the list if needed. And once that public comment period is done, we'd put the list up for concurrence to the full council.
Thank you. I can make the change today, and I'll email to you the type 2, part 2, type 7, number 3. I'll add that zoning various word into it. Or thank you very much. No problem.
Okay. So Ananda, you think we can bring it up, or we can't? Do we have to wait till next month?
Might have to wait till May, just because I don't see the action item on the agenda as drafted.
Okay.
Hold on, we can ask Allison at full council.
We have committee update, so it's not.
Yeah. So maybe maybe you can ask, but even on the full council agenda, I didn't put an action item to vote for.
I see.
So I have to add that for me.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
Japing, if you could just send me the revised list, and then we'll proceed with the next step.
Thank you very much.
All right. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. And sorry, we are going to log
Thank
off
you.
really quickly because we got to start our full council
Thank
meeting.
you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, adjourn at 1 p.m.
Thanks.